Welcome to the D6 Family Ministry Podcast, a place where ideas, principles, and personalities come together to give you a ministry advantage that empowers the church and home.
I don't know anything more important in our society or in the kingdom of God than to help the church, help the family.
Discipleship is not an event, it's a way of life.
And one day it just hit me that discipleship at home was not about doing more. It was about inviting Christ into what we were already doing.
The goal of family ministry is not families sitting on the couch holding hands and singing Kumbaya. The ultimate goal is families that love God, love people, and make disciples of all peoples.
So that's why you're here. You're here to say 1 hour a week, as significant and as awesome as it is, we know that it's not enough and we want to be intentional with every hour.
You're listening to the D6 Podcast. Here are your hosts, Marianne Howard, Ron Hunter, and Josh Wooten.
Okay, guys, I was reading a book. It's actually been a little over a year, and I'm not sure which book, so don't pin me down to this. You know how you're like, you remember something out of commercial, but you can't remember who the commercial was for? Mm-hmm. That's kind of like this story here. It was this research that was in this book, and it was talking about rating the pain level of bee stings. And they were rating them from 0 to 10, 10 being, and how do they deal with pain levels so that when they get to a doctor, it's not an arbitrary number. And I'm like, how do you rate? I mean, that's so subjective. It just did not make sense to me. Okay, so that leads me to, there is pain in marriage. And, you know, sometimes it feels like a 2 and sometimes it feels like a 10, you know? Yeah. So give me one of the pains, and I'm not going to ask for a 10. You share what you want to share, but share a pain point in marriage that's happened at some point that we can openly share with others.
I think a pain point for Chad and I, we're both in ministry. And I know that shouldn't be a pain point, but let me just be really honest with you. Figuring out how to navigate margin and balance with time and ministry and marriage and parenting and church. I added church at the end and ministry up here because I think they can be kind of two separate things. You know, I have a revolving door of people on my couch regularly. So it's just figuring out how to manage time and be intentional with each other. And I think that's a pain point for us because we're building the kingdom, and that can get really wonky because we can build the kingdom at the expense of each other. And that's just not good. It's just not good. We've got to shore up each other and press in to be one and fight for oneness. And out of that, serve in the ministry capacities. And so that's one of our big pain points is figuring out how to balance that.
I'm with you on that. Lena and I both, you know, it's like when I came onto the church, it's a 2 for the price of 1 plus a tithe kind of situation, you know, when you have a wife that's in it. And I think really in many ways, it's the only way that it really can work and really, you know, at least for us anyway, we found our groove. But as far as a pain point in our marriage, and this podcast, as you hear, will kind of play right into this. But I experienced some PTSD a while back, and for the first time in my entire life, a lot of anxiety and depression and panic attacks. And I had done my best to be empathetic with people that were going through panic attacks or struggling with anxiety, but I really did not understand exactly what it was until I experienced it myself. And when my doctor just basically told me, you have to go away for 4 days and reset your entire body, your mind, everything, and unplug from the world. And the way my wife loved me through that, when it was not easy, because just could be being completely transparent, I could be in a grocery store and literally just have to leave the cart there and go outside in the car and cry. Like, I'm like, what is wrong with me? Like, but to watch Lena come alongside of me and help me through all that. And even she would say, I have a deeper and richer love for you, having us gone through that together. And it was just as painful as it was, it was really beautiful to watch my wife, really come get down in the ditch with me for a little while and help me out of that.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's super vulnerable, Josh. I appreciate you sharing that. Mine's a little different story entirely from both of those. While I can identify with what Mary Ann shared, for me, I think this, and maybe it's encouraging to others. When Pam and I first got married, this coming June will be 36 years ago. She's an only child. I'm an only child. That says something right there. And when we first got married, we loved adventure. I mean, I remember she said she'd never been ice skating before, and I encouraged her to go ice skating. That was when we were both still in college. And so she was always willing to go out and try, and she was adventurous, and she loved the adventure. Part of what I think attracted her to me was me being in the military, and that seemed adventurous there too. And we did not have children until about 7 years into marriage. And then within 2 years after marriage, my wife started the journey of her ongoing chronic illness that I've watched year after year take a little bit more of her away. And that has changed our dynamic in our family, because obviously it got worse as our kids got older, and she was not able to get out and about as often. If she did, she needed more recovery time. But I had to come to the grips of this. And this is a big pain point. And I got to tell you, I've not always handled it well. I mean, I really have not. It's affected my prayer life. If I'm being really, really vulnerable with you guys, there was a period of time in there. I'm like, fine, God, you're not listening. I'm going to stop praying about this. And I was just mad with God over that one item. And, but I came to grips with that. I was dedicated to loving my wife. I wasn't required to be dedicated to loving a healthy wife. Mm-hmm. And, I love her. And there's things that I just know that we will never do again. And I'm okay with that, because I can sit and she's my safe place. And, but that's still, it's an ongoing pain. We've been dealing with this now 25, 27 years. And, every year, just a little bit more withdrawn in what she's going through. But she's incredible. I love her, and she's a great mom and a great, great wife. Mm-hmm. So I think everybody, if we were to ask that question, you're sitting there listening on this podcast in the car or on your elliptical or wherever you are, you're reminiscing over the pain points that you've been through. And we're here to tell you it's okay, because pain is part of everyday life, because there is sin in life and there is hurt in life. Yeah. And Laura's going to walk us through some of these areas. And I'm super excited about how she's going to minister to us, challenge us. Like most of our guests, hopefully we're going to walk away going, man, I'd not quite thought about it quite that way before. And so on the other side of this, we're going to unpack this.
We are pleased to announce one of our newest titles, Make Up Your Mind, by Michelle Niedert and Denise Pass. Our mindsets matter. Every day we fight battle after battle in our minds. Negative mindsets limit our existence by keeping us bound in unhealthy habits and attitudes, unless we know how to break free of them. In Make Up Your Mind, you will learn about the root behind common mental battles and negative thought patterns. This book focuses on 10 key negative mindsets and gives tips on how to overcome them using scripture and real-life solutions as we adopt the mind of Christ. Each chapter includes a devotional application section and a Counselor's Corner section featuring licensed counselor Michelle Niedert. Make Up Your Mind is available for purchase now at randallhouse.com.
Today, I am joined by Laura Petherbridge. Laura Petherbridge is an international speaker and author of Step Families of the Bible, 101 Tips for the Smart Stepmom, and other books. She has spoken or been published in Focus on the Family, Family Life, Moody, Crosswalk.com, Family Talk, CBN.com, Homeward, and she is a monthly writer for Lifeway. Laura is also a featured expert on the Divorce Care DVD series. Thank you so much for being here today.
It's great to be with you.
Well, we're talking about a hot topic today, and I would love to say this is a topic that only affects those outside the church, but I think that would be wrong to say so. And we're talking about cohabitation, divorce recovery, and what the church can do to change the trend. Now, something that I've seen in the news is that the average age for marriage is climbing. And there's many people today, many people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, even up, that are just outright rejecting the idea of marriage. What's contributing to that shift in our culture?
Well, what you're seeing now is young people, young adults, that have not only seen their parents get divorced, they've seen their parents' remarriage fail. Oh. And so the first death of the first marriage, their biological family, they could say, oh, my parents married too young, or they just didn't get along, or that, they can kind of rationalize that. But then when their parent remarries and that marriage dies too, because second marriages fail at a much higher rate than first marriages do. And so they're watching the second marriage fail also, and that is communicating marriage doesn't work. It worked for my grandparents, but society is so different now, it doesn't work anymore.
Well, when I was growing up, I saw cohabitation happening, but usually it was entirely among those who were outside the church. Now I'm seeing it somewhat common inside people that are inside the church. And I've heard things like, well, as long as we're not sleeping together, it's okay. Or we had to do this for money reasons because the economy is so bad or rent is so high. Can you respond to that?
It really is a matter of convenience for a number of people, number of young people, but really they just don't view marriage in the same vein as I did as a person who's a baby boomer and my parents, my grandparents. I grew up in a generation where you hardly ever saw anybody living together. So it really just has become the trend. And you're absolutely right. It is no different within the church. When I do pre-marriage stuff or when I do pre-marriage conferences or preparing to get married, preparing to remarry, they're almost always living together. And so there's just this sense of it's not that big of a deal. And I think part of that, if I can be totally honest, is the church's fault. So we need to explain not only why God says, no, don't do that. We have to explain why. We're very good at saying, no, don't do that. We're very weak at explaining to them why. When God says no, he only does that for one reason. It's to protect us. But you see, they don't feel they're being protected from anything. They have no need to not live together. And so guilt and shame aren't going to do it. And so there's got to be more teaching in the church on the why.
Could you walk us through that a little bit? Because, like you said, they're not necessarily responding well to that. And if someone asks me, well, why is cohabitation wrong, or why shouldn't I live with my boyfriend? I can hit them hard with a biblical answer. It may not be coded in love. It may be a whole lot of truth and not much grace. So could you kind of walk us through if someone approached you with that and said, well, what's the big deal?
Yes, it really is. To be honest with you, this is a great answer for almost any sin, not just cohabitation, because you really can apply what I'm going to say to almost any current trend that is sin-rooted. And we in the church, we give people a lot of information, biblical information on what's right and wrong, what we're against. But we're very, very weak at explaining to them, God is crazy in love with you. And that is why he doesn't want you to do this. This is not to keep you from having fun or to keep you from feeling good. So what I do when I talk to, and, again, I speak to a lot of single parents, step families, and I'm trying to explain this to them. I have to share with them my experiences. See, I use a lot of my own story because I didn't come to know Christ till I was 24. So I can share with them, I used to think this was all about rules until I came to know my daddy. Once I learned who my daddy was, and that was a hard process because I have a lot of childhood pain. Once I learned that God was crazy in love with me, it was so much easier to hear the don'ts. It was so much easier to go, oh, he's my father. And see, I didn't have a good father image, and I kind of portrayed that onto God. So really, we've got to help people with their pain, inner pain, before we can start giving them rules that are God's rules, because it's bouncing off.
Well, if we were all living in a vacuum and there was no such thing as sin and there was no such thing as the fall and no brokenness in the world, I think life would be a whole lot easier. But we know that is not the case. And sadly, so many people in our churches today have come out of fractured homes, or they've come out of homes where abuse or addiction played a role. And it can really leave people feeling like damaged goods. I've heard people say that I'm damaged goods, or I am just baggage. And they say that about themselves. How can these individuals find healing and avoid bringing this emotional baggage into a marriage or into a relationship?
It's a huge issue in marriage today. I would say 80% of the clients that I life coach, that is a root problem. It's male and female. And, I was a Christian for probably 10 years before I stopped trying to perform for God. And that came from what you just described, a lot of pain, childhood pain, my own parents' divorce. I had a lot of voices in my head saying, I'm damaged goods, I'm bad, I'm unlovable. And I had to get that healed. I had to let Jesus heal those voices that were telling me, yes, I'm saved. And so, I say Jesus washed away my sins. He didn't wash away my brain. And so I had to learn how to think like Christ and attend a lot of Christian classes and books and resources and therapists that would help me to learn who I am in Christ and how to have the mind of Christ. And it took a long time. That did not happen overnight. It was only then that I began to understand I don't need my husband to meet my needs. I got to stop expecting my spouse to meet my needs. Only Jesus can meet my needs. I am not incomplete without a spouse. See, we teach that to people in the church. You're not complete unless you're married. And what that says is if you're unloved by your spouse or you have an abusive spouse, I'm unlovable. Jesus completes me. My husband does not complete me. Because if he should die or leave me, that means I'm incomplete. Now, don't get me wrong. Marriage is a wonderful institution created by God. I am not pro-divorce. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we've got to get rid of the idea in the church that you're only productive and healthy and whole if you're married.
That's right.
And that starts in singles.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to continue talking about this topic. We'll be right back.
Start connecting with your family today with the D6 Family app, available for free. Based on Deuteronomy 6, D6 is the leading voice in family ministry. Scripture teaches that parents are the primary disciplers of their children. The D6 Family app delivers resources that are updated weekly and designed to equip you for generational discipleship. Resources include family fun questions, weekly splinks, parent pages, family fun nights, foundational talks, the D6 podcast, and more. Connecting with your family has never been this easy or fun. Download the D6 Family app today.
We are back, and we're talking to Laura Petherbridge, and we're talking about cohabitation, divorce recovery, and what the church can do to change the trend. Now, it's unfortunate, but I've heard many people in their 20s and 30s say that divorce is inevitable, and it's just a natural part of evolving. They almost act like it's, when you buy a car, you can expect to have it for maybe 6 to 10 years if you're lucky, and, you're going to just get rid of it then and start all over again. It might not be possible to divorce-proof a marriage 100%, but what can couples do to make sure that their marriages are headed toward lifelong success instead of a split?
They need to find classes and churches that are willing to address the real reasons why people are getting divorced. The church does very little to address the real reasons. We spend a lot of time talking about communication, even sexual habits or that kind, we even address some subjects that we didn't used to when I was growing up. That is not the reasons people get divorced. The top 3 reasons why people get divorced is addiction, abuse, and adultery.
Can you say those one more time? Because I know people are going to write this down.
Addiction, abuse, and that includes emotional abuse, and adultery are the top 3 reasons why people in America get divorced. And the church does very little to address those 3 subjects. We spend a lot of time about how you communicate and I'm all in favor of the marriage books that are out, but they don't address those issues. If we really, in the church, want to get serious about stopping divorce in the church, we've got to start talking about codependency, enabling, people-pleasing behaviors that have become epidemic, how to discern the real difference between love and leniency, how to discern whether you are rescuing someone from a sin that you need to let them suffer the consequences for that sin. See, we're doing a very, very poor job of that. And if we would start addressing those issues, addiction, adultery, and abuse, we could cut the divorce rate in half.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I know that every situation is different, but what wisdom would you offer to the Christian couple that feels like they're headed for divorce and that their marriage is beyond saving?
I think you've got to get a therapist or a group that is going to go to the root of the issue. For example, when I got remarried within the first 6 months. First of all, I had no idea what I was getting into in a step family, being a stepmom. I was clueless. Even though I grew up and had 2 stepmothers myself and 1 stepdad, I thought I know what it is to be a stepmom. I was clueless. And so first 6 months, I was like, I got to get out of this. But now I'm a Christian. How am I going to get out of this? How am I biblically going to get out of this? Because this is not the life I want. This is way more complicated. I don't even like his kids right now, much less love them. And that was 36 years ago, by the way. And so I had to start praying. God, teach me what's the problem here? What's the problem? And I had to learn what was broken in me. So that would be my first encouragement to these couples. Very often we put them in like a class that talks about communication or, some of these things when that's not really their issue. They've got to get down to what is broken in me that I'm trying to get that need met by something other than Christ. Why am I hurting? And see, it's got to go beyond the surface reason. It's got to go deeper. And that usually requires a professional or a life coach. I mean, I do a lot of that myself. And I go for the jugular. I go right to, okay, why don't you like yourself? Why? Let's go beyond your marriage issues. So, yeah, you got to get with somebody who's willing to hold your feet to the fire. And if you're married to someone who is abusive, manipulative, controlling, narcissistic, you've got to get a therapist that's going to hold them accountable and tell them, you either want to change this or you're going to lose your family. Make a decision.
Well, I want to end on this question. Everything you've been sharing has been so good and so rich. What can the church do to reignite the desire for a Christian marriage?
They can dig deeper and learn from people like me that have been working with divorce recovery for over 30 years. Stop thinking the marriage material that you're using, this cookie cutter marriage material, is helping these couples who are young, who have experienced radically different upbringing. They've seen so much trauma. Many of them have not healed from their own family trauma. They've got to start addressing those issues with these couples rather than just putting them through the traditional marriage material. That's what the church can do.
Well, I want to mention your books again, Step Families of the Bible, 101 Tips for the Smart Stepmom, and others as well. You can, type in Laura Petherbridge and you're going to find her other books. And I want to mention this because there are certain aspects of the Christian mark that are saturated, this is not one of them. There
That's
are
for
not
sure.
many books out there dealing with step families, especially from a biblical worldview and a Christian perspective. Thank you so much for sharing this today, and thank you for what you're doing. You are hitting a group that needs this so bad, and yet they're not hearing many voices in their lives, especially coming from a Christian perspective. So thank you, and thank you for being here today.
You're very welcome. It's an untapped mission field, really. And the website is thesmartstepmom.com.
Oh man, that was such a different take. And I really appreciated her approach. And she really called out the church in this area of restoration. And I appreciate a couple of things that she said. Number one, she said, help people with pain. And that's really who we are as shepherds, is we are to help people with their pain. And that's going to look different in various ways. What did you guys think about when she said that the real reason for divorce is addiction, abuse, and adultery? I mean, she whittled it down to basically those three things. And she has research to support that because of kind of how she shared it. What do you guys think about that statement? And do you feel like it's true? And what are the implications of that?
Well, for me personally, walking with people in ministry that are going through divorce, those are three of the ones that pop up because it used to be you hear about, people would divorce over money, but that has become less and less. It seems to me, for the reasoning and these things, the addiction, the abuse, both physical and mental, and adultery are the big three. And it saddens me because, one of her main points is getting to the root and even teaching about why people are getting divorced and trying to head some of these things off at the past, because those actions, the abuse, people that are addicted or even that fall into adultery, it's usually a consequence of something else. There's a root issue going on in their lives that are not being addressed, and they are treating it through substance abuse or lashing out or even searching for love and something else besides their spouse. And I think being honest about those things, and like she said, finding classes in church that teach about this stuff. It's not very popular. It's not one that you want to promote on Sunday. Hey, why do people get divorced? Come find out in room 101 after the 9:30 service. But I think it really could be very beneficial for us to take a look, as Simon Sinek said, of the why behind why people are getting divorced.
Yeah, I'm with Josh. That's not an attractive way to do a marriage class, but I did like one phrase she used: divorce proof, and that would be a good title of a class. However, back to your question, when she said those three areas, addiction, abuse, and adultery, I actually recoiled and went, no way. Laura, if you're listening, I again, you have to know my mind. My first thought is analyze. Everything I hear, I have to analyze, and I have to walk through all the exceptions. And I begin to go, hold it, what about communication? Is communication one of those things? Because you're like, well, in truth, it could fit under one or two or three of the others. I mean, communication oftentimes fits under that abuse umbrella. The way we communicate can become abusive, manipulative, whatever in there, or even controlling could fit the addiction. If it's money, I think that fits under the addiction side. One of the common phrases people say is, I've grown apart. Well, you can grow apart based upon addiction to whatever you're growing to that caused you to begin to grow apart. And then I put it through the whole Gary Chapman lens. What about the 5 love languages? And you could make the attachments back there in most of those back. And I'm like, Laura, you're brilliant, and while it's a different way of saying it, that's really, really important for us to look and go, man, I don't want to admit addiction. I don't want to admit abuse, and I don't want to admit adultery. But a lot of what we deal with in our marriages do fit under those umbrellas in some fashion. So, Marianne, I don't know what to do with that, but that caused me to think. I hope it caused our listeners to think.
Absolutely. I also appreciate that she brought out about cohabitation, the numbers of cohabitation in the church are increasing.
Yeah.
And so I think she's posing a great argument and a great problem for churches. Restorative ministry, addiction ministry, like, doing restorative ministry within the church. I think like Celebrate recovery ministry. I think that's vital to help strengthen marriages and address the cohabitation issue. I think also it goes back to a previous podcast. We've got to be really faithful with truth and make sure that truth is what the truth is influencing culture and not the other way around, And so anyway, I appreciated her words today. They were very different, definitely worth considering as you guys are leaders in the church and implementing, when you're doing marriage ministry or you're divorce proofing ministries. She's given us some great things to think about. I think some of the things that she's saying could really launch a really great vision inside of churches, to be more passionate about taking care of marriages and making sure that we're focusing on the right things to help fortify them.
That's right. I'll challenge our listeners on this as we close out. When we hear somebody like Laura, she's like, oh, wow, coming at it from a different paradigm. And if she's touched on these points, search back through our archives and search marriage. You're going to be able to pick up John McGee. You're going to be able to pick up others along the way that we have interviewed on marriage. And, if you're hitting a problem and you're scared to talk to anybody else about it, start with the podcast, because that's going to be the way the Holy Spirit's going to start working on your heart first. And that would be our challenge. Next week, we're going to be looking at creative ways to approach Bible stories with Melissa McDonald. Until then, we're praying for your marriage. We're praying for that openness that you have in looking at the areas that we need to divorce proof and truly recommit to our spouse. We appreciate you listening. We'll talk to you next week.
You've been listening to the D6 Podcast. You can learn more about D6 at d6family.com.